Now, I'm heading off to a very important appointment, and on the way I want to talk to you about vaccines, the lottery, and how psychology is as bad as the rest of us when it comes to understanding probabilities. Now, in many countries, we've a problem with people hesitant to get the COVID vaccine, particularly AstraZeneca, because of those fatal blood clots. And people who are hesitant are getting a bad rap. But there's nothing wrong in being hesitant, particularly given this pandemic situation is so far outside of our ordinary experience. In fact, you'd be a bit stupid not to feel hesitant. Hesitancy is not really the problem. Governments like to say it is, because it takes the blame away from them. The problem is actually the government not doing what it needs to do to reassure people about the vaccine. So what are governments doing? Well, mostly they're trying to persuade people through throwing a lot of statistics at them. They're also turning to behavioural sciences for help, particularly with this thing called nudge theory. Now, nudge theory is typically used by governments who don't want to be seen as imposing their will on the people. So when the government wants people to choose A rather than B, they want to nudge the person towards A. And if anyone says, "Oi, stop telling me what to do," the government just replies, "Hey, we're not. Calm down. You can still make your own decisions." Now, psychology is one of the key behaviour sciences that advises governments on nudges. And one nudge is to provide people with material incentives to get vaccinated. This happened in a number of jurisdictions in the US, where the government gave people a free lottery ticket for getting vaccinated. And they're thinking of doing the same thing here in Australia. Now, that's a bit odd, and I'll tell you why. Most of this hesitancy is in relation to AstraZeneca. And the latest figures cited by the Australian government, Department of Health, they said about 1 in 50,000 people at risk of getting a blood clot from AstraZeneca, and 2 to 4 cases of those prove fatal. So that's around a 1 in 1.6 million chance of dying from AstraZeneca. Now, at the moment, they're talking about a 1 in 2 million chance, but it's a very, very small chance. How about the odds of winning the lottery? Well, winning the jackpot in Australia, chances of that in the Oz Lotto, around 1 in 45 million. In the US, the chances of winning the top jackpot from the Mega Millions lottery is 1 in 300 million. So the chances of winning the lottery are far less than the chances of getting a fatal blood clot from taking AstraZeneca. So offering people a lotto ticket shouldn't be much of an incentive to get vaccinated. But it is an incentive. And it's because people don't understand probabilities based on big numbers. And it's not because they're dumb, it's because they're not used to working with big numbers. Now, most of us struggle to understand odds that involve big numbers because we aren't used to thinking at that scale. Epidemiologists and public health scientists work at that scale and have spent most of their careers getting their heads around big numbers because they have to work at a large scale, a population scale, so they have no trouble with big numbers. The rest of us, well, we don't regularly have to think about things at a population level. We mostly have to think about things at a small group level, our friends and family, maybe up to our community, but not the whole population. If people thought like epidemiologists, they wouldn't get worried about taking AstraZeneca, and they wouldn't bother about picking up their free lottery ticket after they'd been vaccinated. Generally, when it comes to dealing with big numbers, such as odds of 1 in a million, most people make sense of those numbers through using a thing known as framing. Framing is a type of heuristic. It's a shortcut that helps us to decide on whether a risk is worth taking. And that decision is made on the basis of whether we're focused on the gains or the losses that might follow from doing such and such a thing. So, with the lottery, people's decision-making is often framed by a focus on the gains, and with the vaccine, at the moment, people's focus is often on the losses. Why does that happen? Well, because when we think of the 1 in a million, we're thinking about us being that one, and that one is the winner. That's how the advertising works. That's how it's geared around the lottery, to make us imagine ourselves as the winner. And that shifts our attention away from what 1 in a million actually means. It actually means it's not going to be me. But we start to think it could be me. When it comes to the vaccine, same thing. When we hear that there's a 1 in a million chance of dying from a vaccine, we think, well, that one could be me. Oh, I'm now getting framed by a tunnel. Hold on. So framing is impacted by advertising, but also by mainstream media, particularly news reporting, which often focuses on the people who won the lottery, and it focuses on the people who got vaccinated and died.
Concerns around the safety of the AstraZeneca vaccine have been realised here in Australia, with medical experts confirming the death of a Central Coast woman is likely linked to the jab.
Unfortunately, we don't have a great news media in many countries. We've got a sensationalising, nihilistic news broadcaster like the Murdoch press, who seems to think that to keep people engaged, you need to scare the crap out of them. Now, I'm sure there's an element of that when it comes to making big headlines out of deaths caused by vaccines, but I think it's also something far less sinister than that. There's nothing newsworthy about hundreds of millions of people who don't win the lottery, and the same as it's not news that there's hundreds of millions of people who haven't died from the vaccine. You know, the news searches out for those novel stories, you know, the unusual, but it also searches out for character-driven stories. We come to understand the world largely through storytelling, and the news largely tells us about the world through telling us stories, and people are most engaged by character-driven stories. You know, a person who's at the heart of the story that we can feel empathy for, or fascination about, or anger towards. You know, a person at the heart of the story that we can relate to. When it comes to the vaccine, just as with the lottery, they look for those individual stories with people dying from the vaccine or winning the lottery. It's those stories that they bring to our attention because it's a story about a person, not a story about a population, but about a person and a person's life, and that engages us. Now, that's bad news for drug companies if the news is searching for the stories of the people who've been harmed by a drug. And that's why drug companies try to take back the agenda and take control over the narrative. They want people to focus on the stories of the people who've benefited from the drugs. And they often employ the same type of character-driven narrative to do that. Now, they're legally required to inform people about the adverse effects of drugs, so how do they combine the two things? Well, have a look at this advert from the US. In the US, drug companies can advertise directly prescription drugs directly to the public. They can directly advertise prescription drugs to the public. There you go, here's the advert.
Then the chronic, widespread pain drained my energy. My doctor and I agreed moving more helps ease fibromyalgia pain. She also prescribed Lyrica.
For some patients, Lyrica significantly relieves fibromyalgia pain and improves physical function.
With less pain, I feel better.
Lyrica may cause serious allergic reactions or suicidal thoughts or actions. Tell your doctor right away if you have these, new or worsening depression or unusual changes in mood or behavior, or swelling, trouble breathing, rash, hives, blisters, muscle pain with fever, tired feeling, or blurry vision. Common side effects are dizziness, sleepiness, weight gain, and swelling of hands, legs, and feet. Don't drink alcohol while taking Lyrica. Don't drive or use machinery until you know how Lyrica affects you. Those who have had a drug or alcohol problem may be more likely to misuse Lyrica.
With Lyrica, I have less fibromyalgia pain and can keep moving forward.
So, in that advert, do you see how they're undercutting the harms message with the image and an upbeat soundtrack that pushes that positive lifestyle stuff? You know, even when they're informing us about the risks of harm of taking the drug, they personalize it with someone's story of the person who's been saved by the drug. Now with the vaccine, government's doing the job for the drug companies when it comes to advertising the vaccine, because governments have brought huge stockpiles of the drug and now need their populations to take the drug. And governments aren't using the marketing strategy adopted by drug companies, which is very effective strategies, those character-driven narratives. No, governments are doing the big sell, mostly through press briefings where they use epidemiologists and public health experts and the work of those people to tell us about all of the big numbers, the big statistics. They think the public will understand and respond rationally to those big numbers, and they berate us when it appears we don't.
In terms of hesitancy around vaccine, I want to remind people that if you're over 60, if you get COVID, you have a 1 in 200 chance of dying. If you're over 50, you have a 1 in 500 chance of dying if you got the COVID virus. But in terms of the broader issue, it is far more effective that you would have the vaccines and make sure that you avoid those risks. Because if you have the vaccine, you have a 1 in 2 million chance of actually dying. So the odds are with you. You know, you could take a bet on tab and you'd be doing far better if you'd had the vaccine.
So New South Wales are at the moment in a particular panic as they have lots of AstraZeneca vaccine, which no one wants to take, and hardly any Pfizer vaccine, which everyone wants to take because people think it's safer. But when you throw big numbers at people, like 1 in 2 million or even 1 in 200, people make sense of those numbers heuristically through framing. And right now they're framing the stats on vaccines by focusing on the risks and harms, largely because it seems the sensible thing to do, and also because the media are shouting about those stories of people who've been harmed by vaccines. You know, and we're not being pummeled by drug companies telling us about all the benefits of the vaccine. Indeed, the day after the New South Wales Health Minister threw those statistics out at us, that, you know, it's only 1 in a 2 million chance of dying from taking AstraZeneca, the news reported on 2 deaths linked to AstraZeneca. Now, I'm not saying we should ban the press from releasing the stories about people who died from the vaccine, but the government needs to tell us more personal stories of people who took AstraZeneca and were fine. You know, big numbers related to probabilities don't cut through. Now, I've got to pause because I'm just about here, ready for my appointment. So let's go for it. I'll talk to you after I come out from this place. Oh no, I'm scared, but I always make it through in the end. There we go, all done. Which vaccine did I take? Well, I took Pfizer. Why did I take Pfizer? Well, one of the reasons is in Queensland, this was the second dose, I'm double dosed now. When I got my first dose, there's a ruling in Queensland that if you're over 50, you need to take Pfizer. But there is another reason why, even if they didn't mandate that. So I turned up for my vaccine and they just stuck Pfizer in my arm. They didn't ask me which I would want, which vaccine did I want. Just gave me the vaccine that I was supposed to get. But if I was given the choice, I would have took Pfizer. Why would I have taken Pfizer? Because I'm a psychologist and I don't understand probabilities. I don't understand those big numbers either. And that's what I want to talk to you about next. But I'm gonna get home and I need to have a sit down. Nothing to do with the vaccine. I'm feeling perfectly fine. But it's everything to do with the shock of having to talk about my profession and tell you how it's got probabilities all wrong, how it doesn't understand probabilities and big numbers like the rest of us don't understand those things. And that's a bit of a shock, and that's why I need to sit down. So I'm shocked by psychology, not by the vaccine. Anyway, let's talk when I get home. I've had my coffee. I'm happy. When I was outside, when I was going for my vaccination, I got a hole in my sunglasses. I was walking around with a dirty great hole in my sunglasses. There you go. A bit random. Okay, so who was I? So it was psychology, wasn't it? I was going to tell you about psychology. So that thing about psychology and probabilities. Now, remember how I said that psychology is one of the behavioral sciences behind nudge theory? Well, psychology has got into trouble in relation to its status as a science, and it's all to do with how it has misunderstood and misused probabilities. Now, you might have heard about a crisis in psychology called the replication crisis, where very few psychological studies have been replicated, so the confidence in the results of those studies can't be ascertained. But it's actually a problem of psychology having a crisis in how it uses probabilities. Now, I remember when I was studying psychology at undergraduate level at university, this was training back in the mid-1980s, late 1980s, I could never really figure out statistics. I was always getting high grades in my statistics courses because I just followed the instructions, but I could never really understand why I was doing what I was doing. And I remember getting taught by my university tutors about probability levels. We were taught to run an experiment, apply a statistical test to the results, and look up the test score on a statistics table, which contained lots of probability values, to see what probability level we could claim for our test score. And we were told that if our probability level was equal to or below a particular alpha number, which for psychology we were told was 0.05, our score would be statistically significant and our experiment would be a success. Whatever hypothesis our experiment was testing would be deemed true, with there only being a 5 in 100 chance or 0.05 chance of our results being due to chance. Lots of chance there. Okay, so I could never really understand that. I could understand how to do it, but I didn't know why we were doing it, why we had this alpha level like that. I could never understand where that alpha value came from. And we were just told, just use it. That's what we use in psychology. In the end, I dumped statistics because I couldn't get my head around stuff like that, and I took up qualitative methods instead. Turns out that I couldn't get my head around stuff like that with statistics and probability levels in psychology because it was a pile of rubbish. and it was a pile of rubbish because psychology had just made up that alpha value without any idea as to how confident it could be. How confident it could be in psychological experiments. It turns out psychology doesn't know whether psychology experiments are a method that's going to deliver reliable, consistent results. So, and the reason is that psychology has only been publishing experiments that report statistically significant results. It's maybe because, it wants to look like a really successful science. Psychology's always been a bit insecure over its status as a science. But I don't know, maybe it's that. But by not publishing its failures, we have no way of knowing how confident to be in psychology experiments. And that's what probability levels would need to measure. We don't know what probability levels we should have for our experiments because we just don't know how many of them are successful and how many of them aren't. And you can't just make up an alpha level of 0.05. A probability level can't just be arbitrary, can't just be a number you choose. But that's precisely what psychology's done. It's picked up a probability level. It's picked a probability level purely arbitrarily. It'd be like AstraZeneca, not telling the drug regulator how many people were harmed by the vaccine, and the drug regulator going, "Oh yeah, no worries. Let's just say 1 in 200. No, let's say 1 in 2 million chances of dying from AstraZeneca. That sounds good. That sounds as though it's a safe drug." You can't make numbers up like that. You can't make probabilities up like that. They have to be based on something. So some say that this crisis over psychology misusing probability levels means it's got no right to call itself a stats-based science, a laboratory experiment science. And this is catastrophic for psychology. And this was the crisis that everyone was starting to talk about in 2011. I think that the talk really became quite loud. But the crisis has actually been going on for a long time, since at least the 1950s, where it was flagged by this paper by Theodore Sterling, published in 1959 in the Journal of the American Statistical Association. Riveting. Read that journal. It's my favourite journal. I always read that to help me get to sleep. I'll put the reference. If you want to read the paper, it's a really important paper. If you want to read the paper, I'll put it in the description box in YouTube. You can pick it up if you're watching this on your phone or laptop. Okay, so now let's conclude things. So the conclusion. So the government tries to persuade people to get vaccinated by throwing a whole load of probability statistics at them that come from public health experts and epidemiologists. But people don't interpret those probability statistics in the way governments expect. People aren't good with probabilities, particularly ones involving large numbers. Turns out psychology is not very good with probabilities either. It doesn't understand probability statistics either. And that's a bit awkward, given psychology is one of the behaviour sciences that informs governments about how to implement nudge theory. That's that theory behind these initiatives we're starting to see come out to incentivise people to get vaccinated. And this whole horrid concoction is revealed when we see nudge theorists who suggest we offer people a lottery ticket for getting vaccinated. That's when the probabilities implode and we see this right royal mess we have in front of us. Now, that would all be very amusing, but the issue about governments throwing probability statistics at people without understanding that people don't act on those numbers rationally and don't understand those numbers like scientists do, well, that's going to cause considerable harm, because it's likely to be one of the reasons so many people are in denial about COVID. The government can't communicate with them, but conspiracy theorists, they can communicate to them because they're really good at telling stories, and we kind of understand the world through stories. So conspiracy theories are usually around stories, and those stories are quite compelling. You know, like there's this guy called Bill Gates who's made COVID up as an excuse to inject microchips into people's arms. You know, well, I've been vaccinated. You know, I bloody well know if they tried to sneak a microchip in there when I got vaccinated. Oh. Okay. No. Sorry, it was a joke. Now I have to say it's a joke just in case. So even if those conspiracy theories mean I can get on with my life without worrying about getting vaccinated or worrying about catching COVID, then that's going to sound pretty good to me. You know, there's going to be a reason for me to believe in those theories, even though they're bonkers. You know, if the government can't communicate with me, hey, those stories sound interesting, and it suits me to listen to those stories. I prefer those stories. You know, COVID doesn't exist. COVID could kill me, and I need to take a vaccine. I'll go with a COVID doesn't exist. Now, governments need to wake up to the fact that people don't think like scientists, stop talking to people as though they're scientists, and it turns out psychologists don't think like scientists either. So that's a bit of a mess. So there you have it. A kind of connection between the lottery, vaccine hesitancy, and psychology. Using lottery tickets to incentivize people to get vaccinated shows that people's understanding of statistics is not rational and objective, but is framed by social context. And it also reminds us that psychologists might be just as witless as the rest of us when it comes to statistics. Okay, that's all for now. This has been a long one. So thanks if you got to the end of it and you got all the way through it. So till next time, ta-da.